So good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining the meeting in person, and also the many colleagues who are watching this live coverage of the event. It's real great pleasure to welcome Indermit Gill to the ILO today. Indermit is the chief economist of the World Bank Group and the senior vice president for development economics. So many of you know his work very well, not only for his intellectual depth and also the very practical relevance to some of the most important challenges of our time, especially in the area of the development. Today's seminar is particularly timely, and the World Bank, as you know very well, has been placing renewed emphasis on jobs as a central development challenge. It's not just about the very sort of labor market issues, but as a core question for growth and poverty reduction, productivities, and structural transformation. This is the agenda that resonates very strongly with the ILO. So, and also I had the pleasure of the meeting Indermit during the spring meeting, if you may recall.
Oh, of course.
Okay. And despite his very busy schedule at that time, he was generous with his time. And our discussion was very open and thoughtful and very congenial. So we covered a wide range of issues relating to jobs and employment, jobs and development, and also explored how the ILO and World Bank Group could work more closely together in the period ahead. So that spirit of the open and strategic dialogue is exactly what brings us together today. So for the ILO, the renewed focus on jobs by World Bank Group is both welcome and also important, but at the same time, our shared challenge is to ensure those jobs, the jobs agenda is not only about the more jobs, the counting jobs, but also about the better jobs. The jobs are productive, fairly paid, safe and secure, and connected to skills, and social protection and rights at work and social dialogue. So I very much look forward to the Indermit's presentation and to the discussion that will follow. So with that, Indermit, thank you so much once again for being with us, and floor is all yours.
So first, yes, it works? Yeah. So thank you very much, Sanyu, and thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure. You know, the first time I came to this building, I was telling you, it was in 1993. I had just joined the World Bank, and I had finished my PhD at the University of Chicago, where places like the ILO are considered terrible places.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So my first assignment when I joined the World Bank was to write a joint report with the ILO, and so I told my boss. I said, why are you making me do this? I said, this is, you know that I hate the ILO. So why are you asking me to do this? And she said, well, I want the report done quickly. So if I had made you work with somebody whom you liked, it would take a long time. So I know that with the ILO, it's going to be done very quickly because you don't like the ILO.
So the incentive issues.
The incentive issues. So anyway, so I ended up working on a report on vocational education and training with somebody called Fred Flatman. I don't know if you will know Fred. Yeah. And I got to really like him. And then when I came over here, I got to really like the ILO. So in a sense, but we finished the report fairly quickly anyway. So I have very good memories of this building back from 1993. So I thought what I'll do today is I'll tell you about 4 reports that we've done, which have to do with jobs one way or the other, and then just a few ideas for the 5th one that we've just started working on July 1, actually, just a couple of weeks back, not even a couple of weeks back. So that report is the Next World Development Report, and we are, I think, tentatively calling it Jobs for the Next Generation, right? But I'll quickly go through these 5 things. The first one is a report that we published 3 weeks ago, right? I don't know if you have seen it. I hope you have. If you haven't, please take a look at it. It's just a cataloging of the jobs challenge, defined whichever way you want, There's not much theory there or anything like that. There's some propaganda there, World Bank propaganda. Okay, but there's no serious theory there. But there are lots of useful numbers if you look at it, and I'll show you some of those. And I think the bottom line of it is that the world has to deal with a record number of job seekers during the next decade. These are concentrated especially in 3 parts of the world that at the World Bank we call Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, and South Asia. Okay? And there's some peculiarities of this, which are that it turns out that what we look at is what were the periods during which the number of job seekers peaked in each part of the world, and what the size of that was, and then map that with the conditions that existed in that part of the world at the start of that surge. And one of the things that we end up finding is that in South Asia, to some extent, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, to an even greater extent, the countries and the regions are the least prepared in history. So that's the first thing. Then what I don't know if you all know about the Business Ready report. This is a successor of the Doing Business report that we stopped doing 4 years ago because of a terrible thing that happened. But now we've come out with something that's much better than doing business. It's called the Business Readiness report. We don't have one ranking for every country. We have 3 rankings for every one of them. And one of the things that we do here is we not only look at what are the laws on the books, but also what is the government doing to help businesses conform with these laws, and also how well is all that thing happening. So in the sense, for every country now we have enterprise surveys, which we are going to do one every 3 years for every country, 180 countries. So, and by the way, all of this stuff is available on the web, and you should be able to access this stuff in your work. So I think pretty much all of the 180 are available now. Maybe about 120 are available or something, right?
Right now, 101, but
Okay.
December one.
but as of next year, end of this year, it will be 165.
No, that is what will be in the report.
Yes.
But if you look at the surveys themselves, some of them are already available.
Yes, surveys, it's around like 190.
Okay.
Available,
Yeah.
yes.
There you go. So, but please do use that, because we spend a lot of money doing it, and of course we use it, but we would like you all to use it too. And then the thing that we are finding from that report is that the countries with the youngest workforces are the least business ready. So, in a sense, if they're not business ready, it also means that they're going to have a harder time creating jobs and that kind of a thing. We then also have a report called Women, Business and the Law. I think this is one of the nicest reports that we put out. It's done by a really superb team, and they look at the conditions for business for women in business and how the law treats. We also sort of look at things like childcare and so as well as physical security for workers and for entrepreneurs. And what that finds again is that the gender gaps are the greatest actually also in these same economies that need to create the most jobs. And it turns out, of course, is that if you don't create the conditions for women entrepreneurs, the likelihood of you falling short in this jobs objective is, of course, greater too. Then there are 2 reports that are still to come. One of them we've almost finished, which will come out in a few months. And that's, it's this report with which we track the progress in the policies that underlay the Millennium Development Goals and then the Sustainable Development Goals afterwards. And so we call that we call the report Poverty, Prosperity, and the Planet, and I'll show you a few charts from that one. And then, we have these 5 focus sectors at the World Bank, which is agribusiness, infrastructure, healthcare, tourism, and manufacturing, value-added manufacturing. And so one of the things that we do over here is we say, okay, are these sectors where the poor people work? And it turns out that's not really where they are. So there are about 45% of people work in those sectors, on average, in developing economies. And if you look at poverty, it's mostly outside of it. Okay. Now, and then finally, the last report that I mentioned at the outset, this report is actually building on a lot of these things and sort of saying, one of the ways we kind of look at the problem of the jobs challenge a bit mechanically in the first 4 reports, in the sense of saying, okay, you have this many people looking for jobs, and you have this many jobs that are being created. So every time you put somebody into a job, you can say, I'm done with that. Put another one, I'm done with that, and so on. So if you can put everybody, then I'm done with that. But that's not the way labor markets work. That's not the way, because, getting a job is usually the first step towards getting many jobs down the line and so on, if you're successful. If you're not successful, then either you're stuck in that job or you lose that job too. So this one looks much more dynamically, I think, and that's the group, actually, Sangyeon, that's the group that I think it would be really good for them to come over here and spend some time with you. Yeah? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to show you a few slides on this one, each one. So this is the number of jobs problem, right? Yeah, I don't know how to get rid of that that audio recording. If you just click that, Nafisa, if you just click that one, yeah. You just X that out, yeah.
It's okay.
What's the constraint?
Okay.
It's fine.
I'm just getting old. I get irritated by stupid stuff like this. I think it's absolutely fine. Leave it. It's cool. It's cool. All right. So there you go. There you go. Thank you. Now I can go on. Otherwise, I would have.
Your mental health is very important.
Mental health is
for us.
okay. And so, as I said, we just published this report here, and it's available on the web. And as you see, the biggest cohort, the only part of the world where the big bulge essentially in job seekers that is ahead of us is in sub-Saharan Africa. And then if you sort of look at this, you actually find that the potential growth in Africa is way too low. And it may be the least prepared part of the world for the jobs imperative in history. Now, so this is the first part actually tells you how we measure what the jobs challenge is. So there's the youth method, the working age method, and the ratio method. And depending on which one, the amounts are different. So, for example, it could be 1.2 billion people, or it could be 400 million people, or it could be 250 million people or so, right? But what actually doesn't change that much are the 3 regions where you sort of see this problem to be very big. Okay, is the MENA region, the South Asia region, and the Sub-Saharan African region, regardless of method. So I'm just going to go quickly through all of this stuff. So now, then what we did was we said, okay, these are the young people reaching working age. This is cool. I can actually see this. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I remember it. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So that's what you see over there. I mean, that's just a breakdown of that 1.2 billion that says EMDEs. EMDE stands for Emerging Markets and Developing Economies. And you see that breakdown over there, which is about, I guess, it's about, East Asia is about 0.3, and Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia is roughly the same amount, and so on, right? If you look at the second chart, you actually see in which years was the biggest bulge. So if you look over there, you see that in East Asia, it was in the 70s, from 1978 to 1988. If you look at ECA, Europe and Central Asia, it was in the 90s. If you look at Latin America, it was in the early 2000s. Then if you look at MENA, it's actually happening right now. If you look at Southeast Asia, it is also still happening, but we are now closer towards the end. No, actually, it has ended. It has ended in the case of South Asia because fertility rates have dropped a lot, thing. And Sub-Saharan Africa is the only one which is really, most of it is still to come. Okay. Then, if you look at the specific countries, if you just look at the absolute magnitudes, you would, of course, sort of see India, China, Nigeria, Pakistan, Indonesia, Ethiopia, and others. If you look at the top 10 youth bulges, as a share of the population, is mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah? So those ones, of course, are in South Asia, East Asia, elsewhere. Those ones are all pretty much in Sub-Saharan Africa. I think Afghanistan might be the exception, maybe not. Yeah. Okay. Then, here's what I meant by saying was that Sub-Saharan Africa does not seem especially well prepared. Is that if you look at institutional quality, if you look at debt to GDP ratios, because that actually gives you a sense of how much fiscal space you have to sort of do the sort of things that can pump up growth. If you look at GDP per capita, which is another way of seeing how much you have in terms of resources per capita to spend, Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't look good at all, especially if you look at the debt to GDP ratio and the GDP per capita ratio. Surprisingly, if you look at institutional quality, which is the thing that everybody blames Sub-Saharan Africa for, that is not particularly low as compared, especially when you look at these are all numbers of what of the state of things in each of the regions when the big bulge in population started. So it's not the case that Sub-Saharan Africa has the weakest institutional quality, but on the other things, it actually is pretty bad. Then if you look at education-wise, you actually find that countries with a big jobs challenge are have especially low mean years of schooling. So those are emerging markets with large jobs challenges, around 4 years of schooling on average. That's about half of that as compared to other emerging markets and developing economies, and it's about a third of what you sort of see in advanced economies. And then if you look at mean years of schooling completed, you see Sub-Saharan Africa, again, very low. South Asia is also pretty bad. Okay. Now, if you look at growth potential, this is a big problem. So if you look at growth potential, you see the potential growth. Take a look at the first two, A and B. So those are potential growth rates. And the potential growth rates you see are fairly high in East Asia, but coming down over time, in part because of China, but also other countries. The other place that actually has high potential growth rates is South Asia, mainly because of India, and you sort of see that staying at around 6% or so. But then if you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, it's worryingly low because that potential output growth is actually roughly the same as its population growth rate. So, you have a region where you're actually not seeing much in the way of per capita income growth. The other thing you see, if you look down below, you actually sort of see, investment is a big part of meeting the jobs challenge, and you sort of see if you look at the longer term trends between 1990 and 2000 and 2024, you see a big drop in investment growth from the early 2000s down to almost about a third of that growth rate in investment. And then if you look more closely at what you sort of see after the 2020 recession, you see the slowest recovery in investment growth following the 2020 recession. So just as a comparison, the investment rebound was much faster after the global financial crisis. Right? Okay. So that's the first report. So please do take a look at the report. Lots of nice stuff in there. The second one has to do with the investment climate. And here, I think these slides are fairly easy to think, so I'll just go through them very, very quickly. But essentially what you sort of see is that, the countries with mature demographics are better prepared in a sense, the countries that have a lot of people are not prepared to create jobs for them. The countries that don't have a lot of people are very well prepared to create jobs. So in some sense, this obviously means that there is room for arbitrage here, except that arbitrage is also called migration, and migration is considered a dirty word these days. It's a dirty word, but it has to be made a cleaner word. And I think one of the things that we were talking with the DG is how do you sort of make migration something that everybody starts to welcome, because it's going to be needed anyway. And one of the things to do is, of course, is to create jobs in the countries that actually have a big jobs challenge, because then you will still get migration, but the quality of that migration is going to be way better in terms of a better fit with. It will be more pull migration than push migration, and pull migration is always a good thing. So that's basically it. And then what we sort of say is that, look, the countries that need to improve business readiness the most are low-income countries everywhere and middle-income countries in Africa and the Middle East, basically the African continent. So this just spells out all of those things. This one, by the way, when you do take a look at this report, you'll find that there are only 100 countries, because what we've had to do is that we've had to add countries 50 at a time, simply because we have enterprise surveys, and you can't do more than 50 enterprise surveys in a year because the industry just doesn't have the capacity to do it. So we were doing it 50, 50, 50. But by the end of this year, the third report, which will include China and India and others, will be done. So don't take a look at this report now. Wait a few months, and you'll have the full report with all the countries there. It'll still have this. I guess it'll still have this approach. But basically, what this indicates is that if you look at this, if you look at the countries, so what the dark charts and the dark parts indicate that the country does very well in business readiness. The light ones says it's very bad. And essentially what you sort of see is that countries that have young workforces and low economic growth, they're the ones that have the weakest business readiness indicators, okay? With a few exceptions, naturally. Anyway, so I'll skip these because it gets into other stuff too. But now, if you look at the Women, Business and the Law report, we've really improved this report a lot over time. And if you sort of look at this, you actually find that here's a chart that indicates that the world underutilizes the talents of women. I mean, the more I looked at this issue, by the way, the more I realized that we don't emphasize this enough, Sangyan. There was a very good paper by one of your countrymen. I'm trying to remember his name, and three or four other people, and they have a paper in the 2019 Econometrica. Mm-hmm. It's a really good paper, and what they end up doing is that they end up looking to see what are the benefits to equal opportunity legislation in the United States between the 1970s and now. And what you sort of see is that in the 70s, about 90-something% of doctors and lawyers, 94%, I think, of doctors and lawyers were white men in the US. If you look at that ratio now, it is less than 45%.
Right.
Then what they try to do is that they try to sort of see how much of US GDP today is attributable to this better allocation of talent to task. And they find it's very high. It's something like, if you think about the difference in GDP per capita between Europe and the US, it's bigger than that. So in some sense, the biggest, like a sizable part of the higher per capita income that you see in the US, something like between 25 and 30%. Yeah. So these are huge gains. And by the way, in some countries like India and so on, these gains are all ahead of them. Okay. So in some sense, by the way, India's potential growth, those estimates are even too low, because if you sort of really make a big change in the job, I guess, in the physical security of women, in childcare, in other norms and so on, you can actually get much, much more, right? And by the way, even if you just improve the legal framework, that helps. Even if it's on the books, it helps a lot. Okay? And of course, they're not enough, but they do help. Okay. So then, this is the last of the reports that I'll discuss. And essentially what you sort of see over here is that, when you look at where the poor are, they're mostly in agriculture and non-farm rural works, work. They're mostly in non-wage employment. These are things that you guys, we use ILO data for a lot of these things. And if you sort of look at most of the people who live in extreme poverty are in self-employment or in household enterprises. And so then when we look at this, we say, okay, so if the non-poor are mostly in the sectors of emphasis of the World Bank, and the poor are mostly outside, then essentially a big part of that strategy is essentially to try to sort of get people, big shifts out of these things into those 5 sectors.
Er I kommet I lufthavnen?
Just a short break.
It's a short break.
Okay.
Ja. Der er ingen grund til at komme så tidligt.
I think he got bored and started to talk with his children or something. Okay, all right. Anyway, but what this report also does, by the way, it actually gets into the poverty rates and I think and what you see is that extreme poverty rates have kind of plateaued out since the pandemic. Okay. Inequality, by the way, has been falling. So if you look at the countries that have a Gini of greater than 40%, you see that share has actually that share was about 2/3 in 2000, and it's less than half now by 2024. Folks at the World Bank don't ever want to give up on poverty and inequality. So even when these things go down, we end up saying, oh, they're not going down enough. So we have what I call an inequality mafia at the World Bank. So
Is the official name?
they never let you forget. Oh, this 1 in 5 people still lived in economies classified as highly unequal. If that becomes 1 in 10, they'll only emphasize that 1 in 10 and not look at other things. But anyway, I'm sure that you guys at the ILO are very similar. Okay, and then and now we're starting to sort of get at this issue about work versus, is a job the best poverty reduction strategy or not? I think Bill Clinton is attributed to actually said that, and the answer is it may be the best, but it's not really sufficient. It's not nearly sufficient that you have lots of people who work and who are actually quite poor. Now, by the way, here's where you and I talked about it when we met, is that we use this definition of work that you guys have come up with at the ILO. And I think it's a terrible definition. So I think one of the things we should do is we should actually go back and see whether or not that's a sensible definition and why are we sticking to that. Because such a minimal definition, you just work a little bit and you're classified as somebody who worked. Yeah.
He's talking about the definition of unemployment.
Unemployment, yeah. Unemployment.
Yeah.
So if somebody has just worked a few hours, they're considered.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys know about that, so I'm not going to think. But as you sort of see over here, 62% of all extremely poor people work in agriculture, 60% of the non-poor work in services. So obviously there's some transition that needs to happen here. And then if you look at this here too, that if you look at wage and salaried jobs, both public and private, this is basically so in some sense that those 5 sectors that we are talking about, Sangya, those are the kind of I think that the vision that the World Bank has for those are wage and salaried employment in the countries themselves, like tourism, like healthcare and that kind of thing. So these are the 5 sectors of focus, as I said.
Yeah.
There's infrastructure, that's about 12%, agribusiness, that's about 7%, and then you see over there you've got health, tourism, and manufacturing about 5%, 7%, and 10% each. So that adds up to about 43%. Yeah. I'm going to skip that one. And so this looks at what has been the change, or what have been the changes over time in emerging markets and developing countries from 2005 to 2024. And you see there has been a big shift out of self-employment into other self-employed agriculture into other non-ag employment. There's been a sizable growth in healthcare, but not much else happening. So weak expansion of agribusiness, weak expansion of infrastructure and energy, etc. Weak expansion of, actually, a decline in tourism in some sense, right? I think we're almost there. So we froze, yeah. We froze, Nafisa.
Can you move to the next slide, please?
There you go.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. At the end of it, it's not just getting a job. It has to be much greater wages. Yeah.
Okay.
So here I thought that the ILO reckons that 200 million people in the world are unemployed, but 900 million people are working poor. There has to be you need to think, I think somebody at the Brookings, actually, Ibrahim Akulebali, tried to come up with a measure where he says you define somebody as having a job if they are no longer poor. I mean, there are problems with that too, but one needs to think about something else rather than what we have right now. Yeah. So then, this is what we just had our annual bank conference on development economics, and we actually looked at this issue, and so I said over there that the ILO definition of a job is unhelpful. And getting a job is just the first step to prosperity. I think this is important. And then I think that in a sense, we need to think more about how we do labor economics. So for example, I just presented at the WTO the results of our latest World Development Report on AI. And somebody asked, that doesn't this mean that we have to have a new social contract? Doesn't this mean that we have to do all of these things? And I said, before we start talking about these big terms like social contracts, if you just look at taxes on labor, okay, and compare them with taxes on capital, and compare them with taxes on technology, taxes on labor are much higher than taxes on capital. And in general, we subsidize new technologies. So if you think technology is coming at you too fast or technological change is happening too fast, then why the heck are you still subsidizing it? If you think that not enough people are getting employed, then why the hell are you still taxing labor? So, and then everybody leaves that question entirely and goes straight into this other thing saying, how do we redistribute money from capital to labor? Well, before you redistribute money, how would you just start by saying, okay, I'm just going to tax them at the same rate, or I'm going to tax labor lower than thing? Because that's a better way that's a more efficient way to redistribute, rather than first collecting in a regressive way and then trying to redistribute in a progressive way, So I think we do need to sort of think about those things. And I've tried for the last 20 years to do it. Nobody seems to be interested. Maybe they will be now, yeah. I'll stop here and take some questions.
Thank you so much, Indermit. I mean, you made it actually. You managed to finish your presentation almost within 30 minutes. 30 minutes, great. Indermit and I have been discussing lots of issues in recent months, so this is really opportunity for ILO colleagues to interact with the Indermit. So I'm not going to comment anything on the Indermit's presentation. So I just want to open the floor for you.
Silence equals consent.
Is it really? Then I'm going to say something, actually. So let's see. Let's have a quick round of the comments. Oh, so probably you can introduce yourself very quickly from Indermit. Who's first? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Casper. I've worked for the ILO for 26 years. Apart from 3 years where I joined the World Bank Group, IFC. And colleagues, it's true what they say in Star Wars. It's much more fun on the dark side. They pay better, they let us travel more and do interesting reports.
Yes.
Thank you for your tour of these reports. It's great to see how over the years the World Bank has returned to sectoral and industrial policies and recognized that governments have a role in shaping policies that also can create jobs. So the question is, how can we get the sector selection right? Obviously, the World Bank is focusing on sectors that are not helping the poor. If we go to the country level, how can we assist our member states in promoting, implementing sectoral and industrial policies that actually create jobs and better jobs? Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Martin Sievers from the Enterprise Department. So there's a shift towards jobs, right, in the World Bank. So can you explain a few of the shifts in terms of what the World Bank is now doing fundamentally different because the World Bank's focusing on jobs? Sort of what's different, what's changing with the focus on jobs? Sorry, it's Martin Sievers from, and I work in the MSME branch in Martin Swan.
Hi, thank you for your presentation, Dibit from the Employment Department. Welcome your take on the taxing on labor compared to capital. But in the first part of the presentation, you talk about the GDP growth in Africa not being at the level historically other developing countries, so it is an important marker. However, the report itself agrees that jobless growth has happened in the last two cases. So that's, let's say, the problem with the lower and middle income economies. In the advanced economies, where the report says 60% jobs are at the AI exposed to AI, there is also a risk of output may be growing because of the technological change, but this elasticity, growth employment elasticity might remain. So in that case, what is the solution? So is GDP important for jobs growth or not? If it is not, how do we ensure jobs that also grow? Because work is more than numbers.
So, can we correct one more question? Actually, the colleagues from the Abidjan in Africa, because you mentioned lots of the African issues.
Really
Coffee, over to you. Coffee?
Yes, thank you very much, colleagues. And thank you for the colleagues from the World Bank. I have just a few questions. It is an interesting presentation. First of all, I like your introduction. That's at the beginning of your career, you didn't like ILO concept. So with regards to that, I want to know what is your definition of the jobs? What do you understand by jobs? And also the same question about young people. Because in Africa, for example, African Union defined young people as people aged from 15 to 35. do you use the same definition for Latin America and the other region? Other conclusion, if I understand very well your presentation, I can assume that demographic trends or demographic growth is negatively correlated with business readiness. So, and that's exactly what is happening in Africa. And when you are referring to the sector where the group, the World Bank groups sector, where there is a potential of employment, I didn't hear anything about the digitalization, which is very, very impact Africa, the job creation in Africa, why because of connectivity, energy, and so on. So, what is your recommendation in this regards? I'm Kofi Agosu, Deputy Regional Director for ILO Africa, based in Abidjan.
Thank you so much. Then, I will get back to the Indermit for your responses. Actually, I noticed our colleagues from Bangkok is also in connection asking for floor as well.
We take it.
You want to take it? So, Ken, I know it's very late.
Oh,
So it's early in the morning, I guess, but Ken, over to you.
Thank you.
it is 10:30 and we're talking jobs, so I had to be awake. So thanks very much. I just wanted, I'm very curious at the conclusions that are coming out from these papers that you have done. You're talking about, of course, jobs not necessarily being necessary for poverty reduction. You're talking about economies with a youth badge or youngest, with young people being least ready, business ready. You're talking about the role of women. I mean, if women are allowed to, to be included in these issues, probably our GDP would be better, and so on and so on. Now, my question is, what is new? Did we not know this already? What is new in what these reports are giving us? Now, I'm connecting that to the idea of the support that the World Bank gives to most of these countries through, policy support and so on and so on. Would these findings that you have presented here make the World Bank fundamentally change the approach that they use in supporting these countries? So over to you. Thank you so much.
So there's one more question, actually, Caroline.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Caroline Fredrickson. I'm the Director of the Research and Statistics Department. And I think my question may be very simple and may just a question of clarification. I was interested in what you had to say about taxation. And perhaps it's because of my background is more on the legal side. I just wanted to clarify whether you mean when you talk about the tax on labor, whether you're talking about direct taxation, income tax level, or the taxes associated with social charges.
Okay, then I can see some more colleagues actually asking for floor. Let's do it in the second round. So, Indermit, if you can give a brief response, and then we can move on to the second round.
Okay, I'll keep the responses short. So I like the fact that Casper said that he'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. Very good, yeah. But anyway, I was going to say, so how do you select these sectors? I think you're right. I know that we did publish this report on industrial policy, and one of the things we tried to do with that report, Casper, was just break down this whole business about industrial policy into smaller pieces. So, because back when we had written the East Asian Miracle Report, we had essentially said that, industrial policy, yeah, it worked in Korea, yeah, it worked in Japan, etc. But don't try it because these countries had things that had a skilled bureaucracy, had macroeconomic stability, had a lot of these other things that other countries didn't have. Well, it turns out, fast forward from 1993 to 2023, and you actually find that a lot of countries actually have these things. Then when I actually went back and read that report, I used to like the report a lot when I first joined the bank in 1993. This was the first policy report. When I looked at that, I found that the authors had really loaded the deck against industrial policy. It was not an honest report in that sense. Like you had to really succeed. You had to sort of not spend that much and get these lasting benefits, et cetera, in order for you to say, oh, industrial policy worked here. When I talked to some of the authors, I found out that it was a very controversial report within the bank too.
Yeah.
And I think the chief economist at the time weighed in heavily on it and tilted it one way to the other. So this time round, I told the team, I said, I'm not going to interfere in the report at all. Go ahead and get all the information that you want, let's just see. But don't just say industrial policy. Tell me what these industrial policies are and so on. So what they did was they actually came up with 17 types of industrial policies. And then what we ended up doing was we ended up looking at what were the prerequisites for successful industrial policy in a sense. Very simple things like fiscal space, market size, bandwidth of the government, bureaucracy quality and that kind of a thing. But I think the more important thing was, if you look at the industrial policies in the report, we disaggregated it into 3 types. The first type was what we called missing inputs, missing public inputs. So, for example, if you don't have decent electricity or roads and so on, you provided that. You couldn't provide it everywhere, so you provided it only in Shenzhen, or you provided it in some EPZs, etc., whatever. The second one, and by the way, we ended up saying, this is not a bad thing to do, as long as you don't exclude others who were not the initial intended beneficiaries, you don't exclude them from also using these services. Good. The second thing was market incentives. These are subsidies and things like that. And we said, be more careful here, because they do tend to become very hard to remove, and they tend to have these interest groups, et cetera, et cetera. But we gave some rules for how these things can be managed well. And then the third part was what we call macro interventions. These are like, manipulating exchange rates, having dual exchange rates and so on. And we said, generally speaking, we think these things lead to bad things within the country or in the world, generally speaking, corruption, et cetera, try to stay away from these things, So that's basically what we did with that. I think that when you select these sectors, they should use the same rules, frankly, and see whether or not it makes sense to subsidize these sectors or something else or whatever it is. Or is it missing inputs? Is it market incentives? What should you be doing to help these? So that's what, now we haven't, because we just finished the report and we were still sort of fighting, folks on the right were saying, oh God, these guys have succumbed to the commies and all. And then on the other side, we had people who said that, because we purposely made the cover, I don't know if you've seen the cover of this report, it's very similar to the East Asian Miracle. And so a lot of the people who hated the East Asian Miracle said, oh, you give us PTSD. We thought we'd overcome this report, and now you've given us the same cover. But at least we liked what was inside. But I think the test is still ahead on this one. So what's different in the World Bank Group as a result of this? What's immediately different is for the last 3 or 4 years before we started to work on the job side, we were obsessed on climate. And it was all about climate. It didn't matter whether or not the country's emissions were 0.02% of world emissions or whatever, or whether they were 20%. It didn't matter. We just had the same thing. And I thought that it actually turned the discussion away from development. We thought actually if even within climate, if the debates were much more about resilience, it would have still stayed about just getting these countries to grow, getting these countries to improve their institutions, etc., generally speaking. But it wasn't that. It really became about global climate change and how to sort of mitigate that. I thought that just that shift from that to jobs has helped a lot, because it brought the attention back to education and labor markets and, healthcare, etc. The kind of things that I think are still very, very important for these countries. So a lot of people were actually, when they were saying, they said that, especially the folks who were working in our human development group, they were complaining about this focus on jobs. And I said, what the heck are you guys complaining about? It was the climate part that was actually shoehorning us into sectors where we shouldn't actually have been working at all. When a country was asking for help on education, we were saying, no. Education doesn't yield enough climate co-benefits. We want you to do instead infrastructure, and infrastructure of a very green kind, like make roads, but you have to do it in a way that is actually healthier for the environment, that kind of stuff, So I think in that sense, what it hasn't done, it hasn't yet. So when I ask our country teams and so on, I say, okay, you did a growth report, and now you're doing a jobs report. What was in that growth report that was not what you actually sort of see over here? I don't get a good answer. At least not yet, And the answer may well be an industrial policy aimed at jobs. It may well be that. Okay. Now, on AI and jobs, what happens? The thing is that if you look at the debates, if you pay too much attention to the debates that you sort of see in Europe, in the US, and even in Latin America and all, it's all about the loss of jobs that would come because of AI. It would displace. It would make people. It would make their jobs redundant, or more rationally, it would reduce the labor share of income, right? Now, it turns out that these are legitimate concerns in advanced economies. But when we did our World Development Report, basically what we find is these are not nearly as legitimate in developing countries. They're not. Because most people, like I said, work in small, very, very small businesses and so on. Also, the investments that they're making in AI, I'm talking about even large countries like India, when they're making in AI, they're not concentrated the way they are in the US, where 7 firms are doing $750 billion of investment, and guess what? Sooner or later, they're going to have to recover that money. And where they're going to recover that money from, the winners are basically going to replace labor. So it's legitimate if you're in a country like the US or in China that you're worried about that this is actually going to replace skilled labor, So, but that's not the case. Even in India, it's not the case. Now, I'm giving you the extreme version of it. Sure, there are some sectors like call centers or like Zomato and so on, those jobs, but those are a relatively small fraction of jobs for Indians. So you also have to sort of look at the benefits that you could get from things. And when it comes to the labor share, right? Yeah, that in general, all the earlier GPTs have led to falling labor shares of things. However, what's also the case in the case of AI is that it will help, and we are already seeing evidence of this, it will help to improve access to healthcare, to agricultural extension services, to judicial services, to education and so on. The quality of those things actually go up in rural areas, in hard-to-reach areas, et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, the inequality, it actually has an offsetting effect on inequality, because those guys, at least in terms of access to assets, it actually goes up. So these things still have to play out, but you actually see, at least, I think the main thing that we learned is don't immediately extrapolate the debates that you're hearing in developed countries to middle-income countries, and even more so to low-income countries. In low-income countries, what we say, even if you just focus on these things, and if your strategies focus, a large part of your strategies basically focus on adaptation. Adaptation is important because, generally speaking, these new technologies are very context-specific, so you do have to adapt them, so you can't just adopt them. AI may be even much more context-specific as compared to previous GPTs like computers and the internet and so on. So to that extent, you have to adapt. Adaptation has to be that. But again, I end up being much, much more optimistic about AI for developing economies, while understanding that there are these concerns in developed countries. Now, Kofi, you said, what do we mean by jobs? Do we use the same definition? I'm going to ask Kenan to answer these questions, because he's been answering these questions again and again for others too. He can do it again. Now, on Africa, what should Africa do? You know, I think about Africa in at least two parts when it comes to this. You've got the resource-rich part of Africa, and then you've got the non-resource-rich part of Africa. And the resource-rich part of Africa, I think, if you sort of want to sort of have clues about which countries have done well in terms of creating jobs and so on, I would look at Latin America, okay? And I would say, what did they do? And I think countries like Chile and others are good examples of it. If for the other countries, that's not where you'll find the good stories. For the other countries, the good stories you'll find are countries like South Korea and Singapore and places like that. And you sort of see what did they do. And I think basically, Kofi, the biggest part of it were investment accelerations. Okay, so you have to have higher things. And if I showed you the investment rates in these countries, they are going through the floor. Okay, they're very, very low. And by the way, I'm talking about private investment mostly, but public investment too. Public investment is being crowded out too. I'm sorry, Carolina, I never got to your... I did? Okay. Okay. Yeah? But I'm going to quickly answer Ken's question about, hey, what's new in these reports? You're just saying the same damn things over and over again. Okay. So, so the first thing is, actually, if you look at the numbers in the first report, we couldn't find these numbers anywhere. So now that we give it to them, now that we give this to you, I think qualitatively you probably knew that the problems were big in sub-Saharan Africa, the problems were big in MENA, etc. But we've actually quantified some of these, Ken, and there are benefits to quantifying these. At least people like, for example, if you talk to the president of Singapore, he wants numbers on these things, and he says, and so we've given that. Now, that's the first thing. But the other thing is when you look at the other reports, I'm talking about business readiness and women business and the law, the main thing that you get from these reports is we take this thing called the investment climate, or we take the regulatory environment for women, etc., and we break it into 100 pieces. And we say, so these are the 10 areas in which you do the worst. These are the 10 areas in which you do the best. In a sense, what we end up doing, Ken, is, I don't know if you have any college-age kids and so on, and they're taking these tests like the SAT or the MCAT or etc. When you look at them, you find that the big value added that they have is what their coaches do is that they give them a diagnostic test and they say, you know what, you're doing fine in these 5 areas, let's work on these other 5. That's basically what we end up doing. And so I know why you asked the question, because I gave you very general, so I just gave you a very general survey. But if you look at these reports and if you ask clients, if you ask governments and so on, what did they find useful about this? That's what they said was useful. They said that I knew specifically that I needed to work on this. When I looked at that, I realized that I had 3 agencies that were all responsible for this one aspect. So I said, I'm going to make one agency responsible for this. And I think that because you're in East Asia, if you have any doubts about the usefulness of our work, go and ask the Singaporeans sometimes. And they say, we hate these reports because they always, we are either second or first. And so then we are like super worried that we're going to fall off this ranking. And so we have to work harder and harder at it. And we really look at this carefully. And I think that kind of thing helps a lot. Now, there are other countries that game these things. Okay, and we know they game them. And by the way, the problem in doing business was a problem of gaming, essentially. That's what led to it. But we've come up with better mechanisms and so on. They're not all foolproof, but they're much better. But I think in that sense, Ken, it actually does create a race to improve the quality of things. Not a race to the bottom, we fix that problem, but it's a race, yeah? So I know why you asked the question, and it's a legitimate question, but I have good answers for you. And if you have any problem with my answer right now, I will give you a call and I'll persuade you that is.
So Ken, I'm going to give his phone number to you so you can continue the conversation.
Kenan quickly wants to just tell you
welcome.
about things. I'm sorry I took a long time.
Yeah, regarding the definitions, we count on the expert institutions' definitions. So, for example, for population, we count on United Nations Population Division. For employment, we count on ILO.
Yeah, that's the problem. We count on you guys, and your definitions are crappy.
But
we use your definitions anyway.
There was a question related to what is the definition of youth population. So again, I mean, some institutions are calculating based on 15 to 29. Some of them are from 20 to 29. But what United Nations use most is 15 to 24. So we count on all our estimates, what we say youth employment, unemployment, or youth population. It is based on the population aged 15 to 24. Was there another question?
Yeah. No, basically, we use their definitions.
One more thing. So for like the World Bank with the next WDR, the definition of the jobs tend to change because right now the team is looking at the dynamic definition. So basically, if you look at some countries, and there were a chart in the slides actually, the jobs is not related to working or not working, because in some countries, even if they are in the same income per capita or in the same development phase, some of them are working really like longer hours, like Turkey and China, and some of them are working like less hours. So it's not about working or not non-working. What the team is doing is, it is a dynamic process. And I mean, the World Bank's new thinking is like, thinking the jobs as ladder, like having the job, then having a better job. The next phase is having the better job. So basically the team is looking at this, and there was another chart which says that in developing countries, this is the problem. If people exit the job market, either they are inactive or unemployed, and this is the problem. Instead of having the better job, so this is the problem of development.
More of them go into these other.
And we want to have the discussion of definition of jobs towards this angle.
I think we share the spirit, but thing is, I know our colleagues raise your hand. That's exactly on the definition of jobs. The good news for you, Indermit, is that we don't have that simple definition of unemployment. So as soon as we have that definition, we have been continuing to work on that.
Okay.
But there is a bit of discrepancy between all the progress in the statistical discussion and definition of jobs and the economic analysis. So I think perhaps the one probably immediate next step after this meeting is organize a bit meeting with the Ken and the RT and others about the definition of jobs, because there are lots of things to be explained to you as well. There will be a good basis for actually working on this a bit more enriched definition of jobs. That's precisely what we are doing, kind of taking into account some of the quality dimensions as well. So with that,
Aarti Grover has been, I think she wants to work a lot with you, because she's been texting me, because she knows that I'm going to say bad things about the ILO. She's been texting me saying, no, you please talk with me before you get to the ILO. But I didn't. I didn't talk with her.
Okay, I'll speak to her in 2 weeks of time. In any case, so Indermit has time apparently, so I can
have all the time you want.
Okay, so let me see who has. So we can be very quick, and then of course Indermit will be very quick in responding as well. So let's take this clockwise, right?
Clockwise.
So you start with Chair.
Clockwise.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chair Verrick. I'm in the Office of the Chief Economist, was saying on too. I won't go to the data question because I know others will, but my question is on Be Ready. So we work closely with Norman and his team on the labour pillar, and some colleagues in this room have given a range of inputs. From 22 to 24. There's stuff there we like, there's stuff that we disagreed and still disagree on certain points. I think, of course, it's a big improvement from doing business. But there are challenges. And I think, it's extremely complex and quite messy now, right, in terms of when you look at the data and how it fits together for policymakers to understand. So I know we don't have a lot of time. So the question is, based on that, how would you articulate to a policymaker the World Bank's current position on labour market regulation?
Okay.
Let's move on. Roger.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked this question first, because by the time everybody finishes, people have forgotten. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Keep going.
Well, in that spirit, let me add to it. Thank you for the interesting presentation. I have the comment on the definitions. I think it will be very productive if we can have follow-up discussions on this. So first, to clarify things, since 2013, there's been a change in the definition of employment and hence the jobs. So according to that, the subsistence work is not classified as employment anymore. What happens with the working poverty estimates is that they are still based on the old standards, because there's no critical mass up to now of the number of countries that collected this data. But now there is. So there's work to be done with the new standards on this issue. And also to mention that the problem that the bank will face is that then you have a break in the time series. And typically economists hate that. Statisticians, they don't care that much about that. So that's the biggest tension. So you would have a reasonable series for many countries starting in 2018, 2019, not before. And that's the way it will always be. We cannot go back in measurement. And then the second point is what the figures show is actually the importance of job quality. This is why we insist in measuring informality, in measuring pay, in measuring hours worked. It's not just that, okay, if you're poor, if you have a job, then you don't have a job. It's like, well, you can have a precarious job. And that's very important also for us. So that would be it. Thank you.
No, I do agree with you, and I do sympathize, because I do talk with our data group too. But, one of the things that I sort of see what they end up doing is that they tend to be probably a bit more purist than we would like, especially because, like they say, oh, well, the latest poverty number that I can give you is for 2018. I say, wait a second, the world changed since then. What happened? And then when I point them to, let's say, the poverty lab or the data lab saying, those numbers are wrong. I say, how do you know? You don't have the numbers for these years. Well, we know because we backcast, and then we look at the numbers for 2018 and they're not the same. So I do understand that too. But at some point you have to sort of say, okay, I'm going to get data, even if it's less accurate, but which is more relevant. I'm going to have to sort of come up with this somewhat different trade-off. But things are happening so quickly now. And I think like Norman, for example, and others, they're using AI to sort of update these things a little bit more. Maybe AI will help on these things too for us.
So certainly we need another conversation on this. Actually. So is it? Okay.
Hi, I'm Marianna Rossi. I work on supply chains here at the ILO. So I have two questions. One is whether you see export-led growth as a way of creating jobs, or what's the World Bank's position on that? And the second, I will not let the labor market regulation question fall, because I was wondering how the new WDR in 2027 will somehow relate to the WDR of 2013 on jobs, which had a very strong stance on labor regulation and the need of having that fine balance of regulatory measures that create good jobs. Thanks.
Okay, Pavel, is it yours? Let me see.
Hi, I'm Pavel Gmirek. I work in the research department, and I was a little bit sad in the first 5 reports that you showed us that you left out the WDR of this year, which is on AI, and has a lot on jobs.
I talked a lot at the WTO on that one. I'll send you my slides.
Yeah, but my sadness is purely personal, because I wrote some background papers to that report, or co-wrote with Karen Winkler, and a lot of the narrative that you talked about developing countries about comes from, I think, those background papers, which is the Disruption Without Dividend, published earlier this year, and Buffer or Bottleneck, published 2 years ago.
I'm really sorry. I didn't praise you to your face, but I praised you behind your back.
It's an obvious joke why I'm putting it this way, but the reason why I'm putting it this way is, of course, because you said that you weren't very worried about lower income economies, but a lot of that narrative that I understand will also go to the WDR goes around what we found in those papers, which is people who are in jobs which are exposed to the risks of automation and might lose out because of that are already digitized, whereas people who could actually benefit from the productivity boost, many of them are in jobs that are not even digitized, don't use internet or computer at work daily. So in middle-income countries in Latin America, we estimated about half of the people in such jobs not having access to hard infrastructure before we even start talking about digital skills. In low-income economies like Mali, I think it's 4 out of 5 people in a job like that could theoretically benefit according to our index of exposure, but do not have access to infrastructure. So I wanted to ask you a bit more about this rather positive narrative you gave. And since I found myself in a sweet spot compared to what Casper described, because I work at the ILO, but I help the bank write papers. I also was...
You're sleeping with the enemy. That's what they call it.
I was also part of the report we just published in Poland, which is the first adaptation of the managed model, the macroeconomic model of the bank, to account for the macroeconomic effects of adoption of AI. And which uses the ILO index of exposure, and we integrated it into the model with the macro team at the bank. And one of the scenarios that we project there, and that's a high-income economy type of challenge, is exactly what we talked about, growth in inequality and accrual of all the growth that we project to capital. Basically, there's no change in labor side, but the whole growth accrues to capital.
Yeah, which means the share goes up.
And exactly. So basically, it goes back, I think, to the question that Caroline asked, and she claimed you answered, but I didn't feel like that was the case, which is about taxation. There are recommendations we make in the report, but of course, when economists say tax on labor is too high, they mean also social security contributions.
Yes.
And it's payroll contributions and employer contributions are an important and crucial part of funding these systems today.
Sure.
And at the same time, the same reports usually say we need social security and income protection to help people with the transition. So how does one square that circle, in your opinion, if decreasing contributions on labor or taxation of labor would mean decreasing contribution to social security?
So, fair enough.
Let me stop there, because we have only 5 minutes, and Indermit needs 10 minutes to respond.
1 hour is way too short for a discussion of this stuff.
It's an excellent set of conditions. I mean, it's an excellent set of questions, and I'll try to keep it short. Yeah.
Okay, so
we have more.
1 minute, 3 more actually. So 1 minute each actually. Then actually, I get back to Indermit.
Very quickly, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Marcelo Cuautle Segovia from Employment Department. You mentioned the key finding of the Globe Jobs Challenge 2026 was the world has to deal with a record number of job seekers during the next decade. And I would like to know what is the World Bank's position in that regard. When I think of job seekers, I think of labor market institutions such as public employment services, private recruitment agencies, training institutions, and so on. So I would like to know what is your position, given that in another finding you said that you consider that in Africa, the institutional capacity is not that bad. And I saw that it was the same in some other places. But from our empirical experience, that is not necessarily the case.
I see.
And we work a lot to build institutional capacity. So just wanted to know what's the World Bank stand on that. Thanks.
And Uma?
Yes, I'm Uma from the research department, and we met early this year. My question touches upon what Cher said and also what was mentioned now. And, you talk about the numbers. You talk about quantifying. There's issues around how you define and all. My question is, are you looking into the question of job quality? Because that's a centerpiece for the ILO. And here, I want to go back to the 2013 World Bank report on jobs, which was led by Martin Rama. And that report was actually it had a lot of consultation with colleagues at the ILO. A lot of us were involved in those discussions, and labor market regulations were center stage in it. My question is, to what extent has the World Bank moved in its thought process, and also to the question of job quality vis-a-vis, what's happening in the world today?
As you can see, many of us have very long memory.
I know.
So, Nasi.
Hello, Monsignor Lamarca from Chief Economist Office. No, most of the things I want to say is already been said about the job, the concept of jobs, but actually the concept of employment, and also the fact that we measure, well, together with the definition of employment, there is also the underemployment and all the discussion about decent work and jobs quality. So just to conclude, I mean, why is it taking so long for the World Bank to measure the quality of jobs? What were the resistance? And why now there's a big opportunity you want to measure the thing only one indicator, mixing together quantity and quality, if the definition of jobs is so restrictive for you?
I got it.
That's a very nice final question, I must
I
say.
know. I agree with them.
Indermit, can you handle all of these questions?
I'm going to try. So the first, there was this question about, what was the question that you asked? That was a very good question. The first question that you asked, you said
It was about export-led growth.
Yeah. You know, so what has happened is that that there's been this sort of a pushback against export-led growth because it says, oh, you know, this means that essentially you're taking away jobs from the rich countries, and then you're exporting things. Now, the way I sort of see it is that for a country that is small and poor, exporting is an important part of. It's an important part of development because countries generally become suppliers before they become demanders, right? So I think you're absolutely right. I think that the debate has shifted way too much to, just make sure that these people actually make sure that they that jobs are not moved from rich countries to poor countries, and then you don't have that export-led model. I would say that the way that I try to sort of blunt that debate a little bit is don't use the term export-led growth, call it trade-led growth. Because trade-led growth means that you're not running constant surpluses. And then export-led growth, I think the problem is one of them is Sang Yuan's country has really done injustice to everybody by making all of those things work so well. So that then a larger country like China did the same thing and got everybody into trouble, So I would say use trade-led growth because it should not be that trade is considered a bad thing. Trade has to be considered a good thing. Small economies have to depend on trade for a whole lot of things, including bringing in new technologies, including exploiting efficiencies of scale, etc., all of those things. So that's what I would actually say about that. But you're right, that model is not gone. I think that model is a timeless one, I would actually say. I think there was just a period during which it was combined with these huge global imbalances. And I think China, by essentially keeping exchange rates, by essentially manipulating exchange rates for a while, for about 8 or 9 years, led to an accelerated pace of the exodus of jobs from a relatively small part of the United States, which has led to all of these problems, like the 2 million jobs, but mainly concentrated in one part of the world. I don't think that'll happen again. It won't happen again in part, for example, if the other large economy that is also that is also integrating into the world, which is India. If you look at India's domestic consumption as a share of GDP, it is 62%. It's nothing like China, which is 42%. I mean, we can talk more about China too, because China's problem, I think that China's problem is that model is not just an export-led model. It is also a model in which wages at home are kept artificially low, because that's what generates a part of the efficiency. And that leads to a whole lot of problems. The problem is, how do you change that model without also changing the political system in China, which is a very difficult question. Your points are all valid. I think that, I did a little bit of what I call the Jeff Sachs routine, where I give one side of the story, and I didn't emphasize the other side of the story enough. I just think that so after we took on board all of your inputs into the WDR and so on, and we say, okay, how do you craft an overall message of the WDR and say, should we be talking about the WDR saying like, you know, oh, beware of this thing, beware of this new technology, is going to eat us all up, etc., etc. Is that what we want to tell developing economies? Clearly not. Clearly not. And so then you have to sort of say, should we have a more optimistic tone to it? That's the reason why I was presenting the optimistic side. The WDR itself will be very well caveated with all of those things. In fact, I'm sure that some of the people who actually, if they had listened, some of the people on the WDR team, including you, if you had listened to my presentation at the WTO, you would have winced. You would have said, oh, this guy's just presenting one side of it, you know? But I thought that side needs to be presented too. Yeah? So you're absolutely right about that. But on the other hand, if you just look at the actual numbers of people whose jobs will be affected by AI in an adverse way, that's a relatively low share. And then conditional. So you have to be conditionally optimistic. You say conditional on these countries doing the right things that they can take advantage of AI. And if you look at my presentation, I'll share those slides with you after this. I actually talk about what those conditions are. So one of those conditions, of course, is don't try to invest a lot of money into advancing AI. Invest a lot of money into adapting AI. Don't, when you're talking about social services like education and health and agricultural extension and so on, don't rely so much on frontline generative AI kind of technologies. Rely much more on back-end predictive AI kind of policies. Again, these are things that come from your work in the World Development Report. And then the third part of it is, you know, there are all these standards and so on that are needed in AI. And the general thinking right now, Sanyan, is, oh, let's mandate these standards, that it should be governments that should be mandated. That's never the way that standards have been used well. The way that standards have been used well is that you have voluntary, private sector-led, voluntary standards, I mean, of course, enabled and encouraged by governments. That forms the basis of a large body of standards. And then you have a residual part, which is mandatory standards, and you use those too. Okay? So, but I think the debate right now is all mandatory standards. So part of what we're trying to do with the WDR is say, don't just take literally all of the discussions that are happening in the United States and say these are the things. I'll give you an example. We were talking to Nandan Nilekani, and he said that, look, it is correct for an American worker to be worried about their jobs. Why? Because a big part of these investments are coming from 7 large hyperscalers, they're called, right? Okay. Now, these guys have to sooner or later talk to their shareholders and give their shareholders. So how are they going to do it? The winners of these races are going to end up implementing these technologies in a way that's going to lead to large-scale displacement of workers. Okay? That's true in the case of the United States. Is it true in the case of China? Yes, it's in the case of China too. Okay? Is this also the case in India? The answer is no. He said, because in India, you don't have hyperscalers, you don't have big government investments and so on. You have a lot of smaller investments happening. Okay? And many of those investments will not be nearly as displacing because these guys don't have to show huge benefits to their shareholders and so on. You can actually have. So that's basically what they're saying, that if you sort of look at that stack that India has, digital IDs, etc., this is going to be another part of that stack. That's their plan. Now, I don't know if it'll work or not, but if these countries end up doing this in a sensible way, making the right choices in social services, making the right choices in the markets, making the right choices when it comes to political things like risks and so on, they might end up being able to come out on the right side. Marcelo, you had a question. I'm trying to remember now. It was a good question because I had an answer to it.
Yeah, it was on the role of labor market institutions for meeting the challenge that you mentioned on job seekers.
Yeah. No, in general, what we find is that when it comes to labor supply in many of these countries, the quality of that labor supply now is actually lower than the quality of labor supply in many of the earlier surges. The other problem that I mentioned to you was in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, the potential growth rates are just way too low. So if you look at labor demand, labor supply problem, labor market intermediation, I think it's also a problem. I think the problem in terms of labor market intermediation, of course, there is the problem of national institutions. But there's also this other problem, which is that the world has turned against migration between countries as a way to intermediate labor demand and labor supply. So in some sense, I think all three of these things, labor demand, labor supply, and labor market intermediation, all these factors have actually turned against. So in some sense, Africa's timing is really bad. Okay? But, I mean, that part of institutions, I was giving you a very sort of aggregate index of those things. Maybe the part of institutions that you're looking at, I was just comparing the shortfall in Africa on institutions as compared to some of these other things. They were much greater. And back in my mind, I have this thing that everybody always says, oh, Africa will never develop because they're corrupt, because these countries are corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. I don't believe that, because that is exactly what Gunnar Medel had said about Asia. And if he were right, then Asians would never have developed. Okay? And so I actually don't believe that to be the case. Besides, corruption levels are very high in high-income countries. We were actually talking about that even for South Korea too. You know? So I don't know if that gives you an answer. Umar, you said, what's the difference between this report and the 2013 report? It still remains to be seen. I think that you should work closely with David McKenzie to make sure that the good parts of that report are here, and then the things that you couldn't get Martin to agree to, that you try to get David McKenzie to agree to in this one. I think that report ended up focusing a lot on regulations, yes, right? Yeah, yeah. So it actually came up with this plateau of regulations, yeah. And the cliffs and so on. And now I remember talking with Martin early on, and you know, Martin had this idea that a job has many external benefits, so at that time the approach was use the Denmark model, don't try to protect jobs, protect incomes, you know? That was the thinking at that time. So come up with regulations that, or these tripartite institutions and so on, that protect people's income. So even if they lose their job, they still have an income. And I think Martin's idea was, no, there are all of these external benefits to jobs, like self-worth and social stability, etc., so that jobs are worth protecting. It's not just incomes. You want to keep people in jobs, you know? And I think that in that sense, the bank has moved more towards that view. I think it's the wrong view, but the bank, I'm telling you about which way the bank has moved. It has moved more towards that there's something intrinsically great about a job, and you want to preserve jobs. Ideally, in these countries, you want to create jobs so that people stay in their own countries and so on. So I think the motives for some of these things are not good, but they've come closer to Martin's position for a different reason for that. So my own sense of it is that it's not a good, I don't think it's a good shift in that respect. Yeah.
Okay, good. So.
You had a question. Sorry. Yeah, I have no short-term memory left. Yeah.
Was simply if there were, I mean, now is a great moment for jobs quality at the World Bank.
Quality of jobs.
But why now? And what are the problems otherwise?
I think the search for one indicator that does both and so on, I think it's a fool's errand. Yeah, I think it's a fool's errand. But I'm glad I'm not going to be around too much from now. So, but I'm going to write a lot of blogs saying I told you so. You know, yeah. But I think that the way that you sort of look at the job quality aspect, if you want a summary measure, it has to be wages and non-wage benefits. You know. And of course, you also sort of look at essentially other aspects like how hazardous or how safe, etc. Those things are. But those things are well established, so you can actually sort of look to see whether or not, you know, I don't think one should try to come up with a single Yeah. Now, but the other thing I wanted to say was, like in terms of the quality of jobs, I would say the wages would be a big part, or at least the wage equivalent of non-wage benefits and all to me. That would be a big part of it. Income security is the only other one. Somebody said something about Social Security, about how we think. You know, if you feel that the right way to fund Social Security is to tax work, essentially, right? Or is to tax salaries. Yeah. If you think that's the right way to do it, more power to you. I think you're going to lose that argument today. Okay. Because it turns out that what you really want to do is that you want people, because whether you like it or not, people say it's contributions. But if the link between contributions and benefits is weak, there is a tax element to it. And there are lots of studies that show it in places like Chile and others. How much do people actually treat these contributions as a tax? And I can tell you, for example, we actually did a study in Chile, and it said that as soon as you qualify for the minimum benefits, they stop contributing. Why? Because they consider the rest of it as a tax. Okay? So I think that you have to sort of see it like that and say, just actually recognize that a large part of these contributions are seen as taxes rather than as deferred compensation. You know?
So perhaps
we can talk after.
Time to conclude, I guess, because when I was in DC for the Springs meeting, I was invited by Indermit to his office, and then I found myself actually surrounded by I don't know how many people there. So I survived.
So I didn't do nearly as well.
But this time, actually, the Indermit did a great job. I mean, responding to all these questions. I really want to thank you for your time, very generous, and also the very proactive engagement, and responding to lots of questions. We continue to have this conversation, even though sometimes without you, Ken is here, Artie, and I think we need to continue the conversation, particularly on the job sector report next year, and also some continued discussion on the Be Ready project with the Norma and others as well. So, thank you so much.
Please work closely with DEC on the jobs report. I think it'll be better for it, and I think that the timing is also good to talk about these things politically. Thank you, Sam.
And let's give a big round of applause. Thank you so much.